In Japan, foreigner or gaijin is often treated as a race all on its own. So when a gaijin up, many times the resulting racial prejudice gets applied across the board to all of us. You may have heard in a previous episode about the times that I was riding my bike and got pulled over by the cops for driving while not Japanese.
Excuse-me-massen.
Welcome to another episode of the Excuse-me-massen podcast. I'm your host, Saul, and in this episode, I want to talk about how living here in Japan is a constant tug of war between courtesy and frustration. There was an article I read recently that hit the nail perfectly on the head, and it basically said, when Japanese people see a foreign tourist doing something off, instead of just saying, hey, that's not okay, they'll often post about it online or complain on social media. It's not because they're petty though. It's because there are two big things holding them back. First, they don't really have the audacity to confront someone directly. And second, they're worried that something they say might cause a misunderstanding or worse, escalate that situation into a bigger problem. But holding back like that isn't easy either. And once in a while, it even builds up to the point where it just explodes and like the nearest person to slip up ends up as collateral damage. For example, I recently saw this video, and you may have seen it as well because it made the news, but there was an Australian couple in their 50s or 60s at a ski lodge here in Japan earlier this year. And the wife was smoking out in the open near everyone. And the Japanese guy who was filming the whole thing approached them, cursing at them, saying stuff like and stupid and, kind of moving toward them aggressively. And the lady told him that she didn't know the rule. To be fair to the Japanese guy, there were signs saying that smoking is prohibited. So, of course, what she did was wrong, yes. But to be fair to her as well, the signs in that area are somewhat sparse, and public smoking is not a justifiable reason to yell at anyone, tourist or otherwise. And to give you guys a little more context, I see at least 2 Japanese people smoking while walking around on busy sidewalks here in Tokyo every time I leave my house. And nobody says anything to them at all. And it's always men between like 30 and 60 years old. And you can kind of tell just by looking at them that they kind of fit that stereotype. Anyways, if you come to Japan, don't be ignorant. Google and ChatGPT are your friends. Just search what not to do when in Japan, and you'll find articles everywhere with useful information. Some are obvious laws and some are more cultural than legal. And that's what today's episode is about. It's what I learned from the mistakes I made while living here in Tokyo and how they might help you not make an ass of yourself the next time you come to Japan. Some of these are available online and some aren't. And some of them might not even apply nationally, but these are ones that I happen to learn the hard way. So I'll give you the taboos and tell you how I messed up to hopefully give you some insight and maybe even entertain you. I don't know. We'll see. So I f***ed up so that you don't have to. But the first mistake I made is one of the more commonly known ones. And in Japan, it's known as sashibashi, or pointing with chopsticks. Just imagine you're at a restaurant in Japan having a fun conversation with some of your homies, and you're all eating and talking. Then someone cracks a good joke. So you try to keep the fun momentum going by saying something and gesturing at them. And it turns out you're pointing at them with your chopsticks. Completely innocent to the untrained eye, right? Yeah. But you're not in a country like the US anymore where people come from all over the world, You ain't in Kansas anymore. You're in Japan, where practically everyone is Japanese, and therefore everyone's eyes are trained to see it for what it is in their culture. That is to say, it's rude. And if you don't like it, you can get out. But it's rude because it counts as a kiraibashi move, which is basically an umbrella term for all the improper chopstick behaviors. To them, it feels like it's confrontational, like finger pointing. And so naturally, it's even more inappropriate in formal or business dining situations. And the way that I learned this one actually was back in, I want to say like 2000, maybe 7 or 2008. I was living in Tokyo with my friend Kato, and it was my day off. And then after his job, he and I went to dinner with some of his coworkers. He was telling a story, and I was sitting next to one of his coworkers, right? And then he said something that was really funny, and I was in the middle of eating my food, so I picked up my hand holding the chopsticks, and I just used the chopsticks to point at him and say something like, "Oh man, that was so funny," or something like that. And then he kind of gave me this like look where it's like, "Hey man, you're doing something wrong." So I was like, "Oh, what's going on?" And then since his coworkers couldn't speak English, he goes, "Dude, you're not supposed to point at people with your chopsticks. That's rude in Japan." And from there, I was like, "Oh man, I'm so sorry." And then I put the chopsticks down, and of course, try never to do it again. I've probably done it again without noticing it, but of course, not intentionally. So yeah, don't point at people with your chopsticks, okay? Yeah. One thing I learned when I was working for Cartier under a Japanese manager is if you really feel pointing is necessary, use your entire hand. So you just open your hand, face your palm upward, and point with all your fingers, making sure that they're all against each other with no space in between. Yeah. So in staying with the kiraibashi topic, the next taboo actually is called chigiribashi, which basically means tearing food with two chopsticks, one in each hand. So in this situation, imagine you're about to enjoy a nice meal, but the home or restaurant that you're at didn't provide you with any utensils, just your standard run-of-the-mill chopsticks. So you put one in each hand, and then one is going to serve as the knife, and the other one's going to be the fork. And you proceed with trying to basically turn this piece of meat into smaller pieces, right? And that's easy enough. Yeah, but to them, it actually looks off because chigiribashi is actually another move that falls under the kiraibashi umbrella. And it defeats the whole purpose of chopsticks, which is to pinch and lift with one hand. And it also looks clumsy and goes against the idea that dishes arrive bite-sized, meaning that you shouldn't need to rip things apart in the first place. Because if you've noticed, like typical Japanese foods are already small. They're already designed to be able to be eaten easily with chopsticks. Of course, if you see steaks or like excessively big stuff, that's not typical Japanese food, right? That's Western stuff that was introduced to Japan. But the way that I learned this one was when I first moved here, I was staying with my in-laws. We were staying with my in-laws, and I wasn't sure how to cut something. I think it was like a hamburger steak or something like that. I was trying to cut it with my chopstick with one hand, and I couldn't get it done well. And then I just decided to hold one in each hand and then just start cutting it like a knife and a fork. And then my father-in-law starts looking at me kind of weird. And that's when my wife goes, hey, don't do that. And I was like, yeah, but I'm trying to cut this thing and it's like really hard to cut. And she goes, yeah, when it comes to hamburger steak, what you're supposed to do is like poke along the edge of the piece that you're trying to cut off. So basically like imagine a dotted line along what you're trying to cut. And then after you get enough cuts, it should be easy to just like tear off with the chopstick, just playing around with it. But that's how I learned. So yeah, don't try to rip your dinner in half with two sticks, man. If you're eating Japanese food, it's bite-sized on purpose. But if it's something like a hamburger steak, just slowly poke it a bunch of times along a line with both chopsticks held properly in one hand, and it should be fine. If you're eating a steak though, and all you got is chopsticks, somebody messed up because you should get some legit cutlery. At the end of the day, it's your life. You're going to do whatever you're going to do. But I want you to remember these words. As a foreigner in Japan, your one moment can become everyone's reputation. That's something I've observed during my time here. And I think it's the interesting difference in racism between Japan and the West. In the West, and let's say America in this case, because I can't speak for other countries, but if somebody fucks up, any resulting racial prejudice or stereotyping gets applied to just that race, assuming that the different races are easily discernible. But in Japan, foreigner or gaijin is often treated as a race all on its own. So when a gaijin up, many times the resulting racial prejudice gets applied across the board to all of us. You may have heard in a previous episode about the times that I was riding my bike and got pulled over by the cops for driving while not Japanese. The only real noticeable differentiating factor is the level of hostility toward certain races. Case in point, that time last year when that restaurant in Shin Okubo, which is in Tokyo for anyone who's not familiar, but the restaurant put up a sign on the front door saying they refuse to serve Chinese and Korean people. And for context, Shin Okubo is also known as Koreatown. So a restaurant in Koreatown was refusing to serve Korean people. I don't know, man. Racism exists everywhere where people are different, and people are different everywhere. So it's inescapable. But I ask that you please try your best to educate yourself on Japanese laws and listen to the rest of the episode to make everyone's life here easier. But anyways, back to what I was saying. Eating Japanese food with a fork and knife in Japan is like eating a cheeseburger in the US with a fork and a knife. I'm just saying, doo-doo-doo. Yeah, so let's shift from table manners to event manners. Same country, different expectations. And this taboo involves moving around freely at a wedding reception. So when you're at a wedding reception, you're pretty much supposed to stay at your table. Once you're seated, you generally don't roam around even when you're eating. Of course, it depends on the type of wedding and that the couple's going for, but I'm talking specifically about the closer to traditional type. And the reason why this one matters is because it keeps the event orderly and respectful for the couple and the schedule that they have planned. If everybody's out of their seat when it comes time to move on to the next item on the agenda, it can throw off the time. And the venues in Japan can easily go into the tens of thousands of dollars. So you definitely don't want to be late because they do charge fees, or they may charge fees if you go even just a little bit over your time. But photo rounds are the usual exceptions. Otherwise, pretty much just be at your seat and mentally present. And this one I learned because I did not realize that when I was at my brother-in-law's wedding, I did not realize that it was like a course meal. There were going to be multiple dishes coming out throughout the session. So after the first thing they brought, I ate it, and then I just got up and walked over to a nearby table with my wife's like uncles and stuff who came in from the countryside. And I knew them really well. So, I was cracking jokes with them, having a good time. And I noticed all these eyes staring at me. And I was like, is it because I'm foreign? This is one of those things where you're just not sure. So I went back to my table. And then when I got back, my wife kind of whispered to me, she was like, you need to stay in your chair. And I was like, why? And she goes, in Japanese weddings, you're not really supposed to get up and walk around. Just look around. Is there anybody else besides you who left their table? And I was like, oh yeah. I only noticed people get up to like go to the toilet or talk to the bride and the groom for something. But she didn't want to spoil my fun while I was doing it. So she didn't like tell me to sit down when I was up there. So at a Japanese wedding, sit down and follow the flow. But back to food, because your bowl says more than you think. So when you're in Japan, finishing your rice is not optional. You must finish your rice. Leaving food, especially rice, reads as sloppy. And the unspoken goal is down to the last grain. And this ties into mottainai, or the don't waste mindset. Finishing what you put on your plate or in your bowl equates to basic respect. People do debate forcing kids to clear their plates, but that's like a different conversation. As an adult, if you're a guest, the courteous move is to finish what you served yourself. And the way I learned this one was when I first moved to Japan. Like I said, I was staying with my in-laws, and my father-in-law is from a prefecture where they're known for rice. So they really take pride in the quality of their rice. And having grown up during meager times in Japan, of course, they would have developed this kind of mentality where you have to finish every single grain. Otherwise, it's considered like disrespectful to the people who spent all that time to grow that grain for you to be able to sustain yourself. So she told me about that. And although he never said anything in the previous times where I didn't finish my rice, for example, in Saipan, when we were living there before we moved here, he wouldn't say anything. He would just kind of like hold it in. But, living in his house, that's no excuse anymore. So yeah, I just listened to her and then made sure it doesn't matter if the rice is like really stuck to the bowl or the plate. You just gotta, pick at it until it gives and you're able to pick it up and eat it. So yeah, finish your rice. Leaving lone grains is really loud in a quiet way. And while we're on food, let's talk about the piece everyone tries to ignore. And I'm talking about the last piece syndrome, or what's known in Japan as enryo no katamari. That literally means a lump of restraint. It's the last piece on a serving plate everyone pretends not to see. Grabbing it right away looks blatantly inconsiderate. And you might not notice it, but you will be judged. The common trick I see Japanese people use to not look selfish is to look at the last piece in an obvious way and just wait until somebody tells you to go for it. And then you humbly accept. I know to some people that can come off as like a useless rigmarole, but you got to remember, Japan is a culture historically steeped in respect. Respect is such a huge thing here. I've said it multiple times on the show. It applies to pretty much everything. And common situations where you can experience this is with izakaya plates, office parties, family style gatherings. Someone will often actually say, enryo no katamari. And then they'll kind of nudge it to somebody to make that person eat the last one. And yeah, this one actually, I don't even have to talk about the past. I can actually talk about the present because this awkwardness comes up every time I eat with people in a public setting, even with closest Japanese friends. Like the difference is I always make sure to eat my fill before the plate is half empty. That way I don't even have to deal with it. So tricks are not only for kids, bro. So to recap, if you're really hungry for the last piece, just stare at it until somebody tells you to go for it. Then you can take it guilt-free and nobody's gonna think of you as a pig. And this next one is also about food. And this one is about eating at ramen joints. So basically this one goes, when at ramen, eat and bounce. Most ramen shops are tiny and built for turnover. And ramen is generally very affordable. So if they can't sell enough bowls per day, they can't survive for long. So you slurp, finish, pay, and go. Lingering has a meaningfully negative effect on their bottom line. And this one's also the norm because limited counter space means longer lines. And ramen's meant to be eaten while it's still hot anyways. So all of these things combined, quick turnover keeps the whole ecosystem moving. And most importantly, for you and me, the prices stay affordable. Outside of the city is obviously a different story simply because of population density or lack thereof. So this pretty much just applies to the city. And unlike the rice rule, you aren't expected to drink every drop of the soup. Just finish the noodles and toppings. And if you don't already know, slurping is encouraged because it brings in air to cool down the noodles just a bit so you don't burn away the skin inside of your mouth. And it doubles as a way of communicating to the chef that the food is actually really good. And this one I actually learned from Kato, or who you guys might know as Robin at this point, because he has like 350,000 subscribers on YouTube as at Nomad Push. So yeah, by the way, if you haven't checked out his channel, his channel is great. But yeah, we used to go to ramen together a lot back when he used to live in Tokyo. And then even after I learned it from him, this one time I brought my mom down to my favorite ramen place. And I also mentioned this place before. It's called Tonchin in Ikebukuro. But I brought her there and then she sits down, we get served. And then my wife and I are eating our food, right? She hasn't touched her food at all. She's just sitting there waiting patiently. And we're like, what are you doing? Can you eat your food? And she goes, what? It's hot. I want to wait until it's a little bit colder so that I don't burn my mouth. And my wife and I just look at each other like, your logic is perfectly sound. We can't really say anything to that. But there's this thing in Japan where you're not supposed to stay in the ramen shop for a long time. It's kind of disrespectful. But she's my mom. I can't push her. So I didn't. I was just like, just so you know, this is the rule, but we'll wait for you to finish and then we can leave. And she said the ramen was great, of course. Yeah, probably won't be bringing her to that specific place anymore. We found another place that's like less busy. So they don't really say anything, which is really nice. And the food is also just as good. So yeah, ramen is eat and go. Save the ketchup, chat for literally anywhere else. So yeah, since we talked about food, let's talk about drinks. And this one's like the pour your own drink culture that they have. I believe it's called tejaku. At nomikai and similar settings, you pour other people's drinks and they pour your drink for you. Putting your drink in your own cup is kind of regarded as like selfish or rude, but it's about attentiveness and respect. And it's usually often up to the seniority ladder, and it builds this like group vibe. So what you're pretty much supposed to do is keep an eye on your neighbor's glasses and top them up when it starts to get low. And when someone serves you, you have to hold your glass with both hands. And you have to wait for kanpai before the very first sip. So if you get your drink and it's the very beginning of that, whatever you're doing, you have to wait until somebody says kanpai. If you just start drinking, you're going to upset somebody. I still have trouble with this one because having to be aware of other person's cup just makes the whole process of drinking less fun. Like I'm trying to escape from stress, not to embrace it, So yeah, pour for others and let them pour for you. Self-top misses the whole point. In my case, I got lucky because my father-in-law is really understanding. And because when I first moved into his house, he would keep pouring my drinks. And then I would kind of pour for him, but I would forget at times, especially when I start to get buzzed. And then he'd be like, no, don't worry about it. And then I was like, if you're okay with it, when you go to America, nobody pours your drink, right? And he goes, yeah. If you're okay with it, I'd like to do that here because I don't mean any disrespect for you. I was really, direct. And I was like, I don't mean any disrespect to you. I think you and I can both have a good conversation if we don't have to keep looking at each other's cup the whole time. And he goes, yeah, that's a good point, especially on top of the fact that, we have to also focus on the communication aspect. My Japanese is not perfect and he doesn't speak English. So there's already this sort of extra attention we have to pay to something else. And then to throw in the drinks on top of that makes it even harder to have a good time. So yeah, he's a very understanding guy. And, thank you, Oto-san, for that. Yeah, that's the list for now. None of this is about walking on eggshells. It's about, reading the room, respecting the flow, and not becoming somebody's anonymous rant because you camped at a ramen counter or treated chopsticks like a fucking laser printer. If this helped, send it to that friend flying in next month who still thinks Japan is an anime convention with trains. If you got learned it the hard way stories, hit me up, Instagram or Threads at xqs_podcast or the contact form on the site. And if you're listening here in Japan, you already know. Be kind, be aware, and when in doubt, finish the rice. It's all out. Excuse me, Miss Anand. See ya.